Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Oh, we're doing wonderful here today, and we're excited about our program because we have a special guest with us today, and I think we have a connection that we have to.
I think we're okay. We're okay.
Okay. But anyway, I want to welcome first our guest, and then we want to mention a few things about him. But our guest is a famous author, and we've had him on our program before, and he's well known for economic writing, and the Black Swan book was a big book. Now he has a new book out, Skin in the Game, and this is Nassim Taleb. And Nassim, I want to welcome you to the program.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Ron.
Well, wonderful. And you've been recently speaking out on foreign policy, something of great interest to you. But you're well known about economic issues. You have PhDs. I can't go over all that you've done, but you're a famous author. And I tell you what, you have done wonders to bring attention to some very important issues. But
my focus, I mean, just to let the viewers know, my focus is on risk. So just economics is part of it, and actually finance, not really economics, was part of it. But I focus on risk of instability, risk of war, risk of system, risk of buildings collapsing, these kind of things. So that's my real specialty, and I hope this will prove to be relevant in the ensuing discussion.
Right. And you know, the whole thing is we've been wanting to get you on, of course, to talk about this, but I've been anxious to ask you a few other questions, of course, on foreign policy, and Daniel will as well. But I wanted to first thank you for dedicating your new book, Skin in the Game, to me, and what a pleasant surprise, what a compliment. So then when I read that, I have a question for you. You referred to me as a Roman, and I go, am I a Roman? I didn't know that. And I want to know, is that one of the good Romans or one of the bad Romans? Tell me what this is all about. But I want to thank you for the compliment.
All right. I called you a Roman among Greeks. And because when I wrote Anti-Fragile, I had constantly this... I developed this belief that Rome, the world we have today was built by Romans, not built by theoreticians, but built by practitioners who actually did not like theory. And of course, the Roman ideals were tinkering, practical things, and a lot of the stuff they have developed, actually, we can't even rebuild ourselves, using all the chemistry and science we have. So this is why I call you a Roman among Greeks, and in the last book as well, I talk about how the Romans dealt with politics, extremely pragmatic, extremely heuristic, and extremely effective. They didn't like big grand theorizing, and they especially did not like empty words. In other words, they did not like BS.
That's good.
Okay.
So, Daniel, what do you have here?
Well, I love reading the book. I love reading all of your work, Nassim, but I especially love you answering your critics. And it was quite interesting. I read a recent essay. You talked about the critics of the book. Some of them liked the book, but they didn't like parts. Some of them didn't understand parts. And I think you made such an important distinction. I think it was to the Guardian reviewer.
Yes.
The skin in the game is not an incentive for action, but rather it's a disincentive. It's a form of disincentive for action. It's a kind of a filter. If you could explain that a bit more, that would be
exactly. So a lot of people have the illusion that skin in the game is incentives, okay? And my whole idea is at no point in history, I'm saying at no point in civilized history, have humans up till today have been put in a situation where you inflict risks on others without paying a price. In other words, if you want to make the money, that's fine. You got to own your own risk. So that's how civilization has been structured since Hammurabi. If an engineer puts a building, he can't walk away and let the building collapse and harm others without being, responsible, having liability. So I tried to put this in the context of tort laws, and of course, libertarians love tort laws. It's in place ex post tort laws, torts rather than ex ante regulation, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon system of law, which works wonders. So that was the idea, that today you have a class of people who don't own their own risk. They inflict risk on others without paying the price. So just imagine if on a highway you had bad drivers surviving accidents. But it would lead to a much higher rate of casualties on a highway. Maybe even would lead to some kind of inverse selection over the long run, where the bad drivers dominate. But in fact, bad drivers are more exposed, or at least as exposed as good drivers, and they tend to die when they inflict risk on others. So they purged out of the system, they're filtered out of the system. And when it comes to war, and I'm sure you're itching to talk about warmongers and wars, warmongers existed in history and have existed in history, but the condition was that the warmonger takes more risks than others.
That's right. Now, I want to follow up a little bit on that in an economic sense, because
Yes.
I think a lot of people I met in Washington, the do-gooders, they would say, yeah, there is some truth to that. We should balance this out. The people it should be a fair society, and we have to make sure that the risk is over here and the profits over here. So they're into mischief, and that's the redistribution that they get involved in. And they work hard at it, and many of them, believe it or not, are well-intentioned. There's a lot of bad motivation, but they're well-intentioned. They think it would be fairer. So they get involved in this, and they get involved with regulations. Now, the answer they give me is, your society says there'll be no regulations. And of course, there would be less, there would be difference. But to me, it is the difference between government regulations and trying to solve these problems, letting the market do this. Because isn't it true that if you have a market economy, doesn't things get sorted out much better? Isn't it much fairer when the market determines who's going to be the winners and the losers?
Exactly. Almost everything gets solved by them. Of course, the exception, you line up the exceptions where you may need government intervention, and we can discuss those. And these are places where you can't sue someone else because you cannot identify the culprit. And you may not even need government intervention for it. So my whole idea here is the idea of tort laws is people that own their own risk. If a corporation harms me, I should be able to sue that corporation, that entity. Now, this idea is very foreign to what I call the class of IYI, intellectually idiots, we're called the bureaucrats, because they think that they can teach us how to live, and effectively they can inflict risk on us without bearing the consequences, and only take credit for the good things. And they have the good intentions, maybe, but they don't know what the real effect is. And let me explain. Any system where people are judged by peers rather than survival is a system that will blow up because it counters evolution. Academics give lip service to evolution. They want us to teach evolution at school, but when it comes to themselves, no. They're selected by one another. So bureaucrats in Washington are selected by other bureaucrats. So if you let restaurants, be judged by other restaurant owners, by peers, rather than by their clients, you see the quality of food would degrade. It would be like cafeteria food, I'm sure, in some Soviet small town. Okay, so but what happens in a system we live in is that people are so insulated from the consequences of their decision, you can't sue them. Okay, that you can't. The second point I'd like to make about regulation. I was a trader for 21, let's say 23 years. Okay. I made money where there was regulation. Because if you have a good lawyer, then you can figure out a trade that can go around the regulation, and that's where the opportunities were. Trading like Japan was overregulated, and financially France was overregulated. That's where the money was. Spain, the United States was less regulated at a time, and you couldn't make as much money. But my business was financial derivatives that made money when there was too much regulation.
When you talk about those without skin in the game, those without taking risks, I immediately think of the media. And look how the media goes from topic to topic, puffing up war, puffing up the neocons. The neocons have been wrong on everything, yet there they are on TV all the time. The liberal interventionists gave us Libya, and they're back on TV all the time. I think this is the prime example of those that have no risk involved, yet continue to thrive.
Okay, so let me start with the bad news and give you the good news about the media, okay? The bad news about the media is that there's evidence of monoculture. And you can see it quantitatively. And I have described monoculture in the Black Swan as follows. If you have a collection of security analysts who effectively don't have skin in the game, they're just pumping, reports, forecasting a price, they're all clustered to a price, and the difference between them is considerably smaller than the difference between their average and the real future price. So in other words, they cluster to the wrong forecast. When normally, if they didn't cluster, their forecast would be spread out all over the map, and they should have the same uncertainty within the forecast as it is with the variable. It's a little technical, but that thing you do again with the media, and you realize there is monoculture. And how does that monoculture develop? Very simple. Journalists are judged by other journalists. They're not judged by their readers. Okay, and effectively they can be ostracized by the editors, by anyone. And all you do, if you want a journalist to support the rebels, the headcutters in Syria, is create a dominant narrative, which costs you $5 to $10 million, not much. 2 PR firms, one in Washington and one in London, developing the idea that Assad kills babies, and that if you therefore say anything bad about the enemies of Assad, that you're a baby, killer, Putinist, Assadist, fascist, Stalinist, racist, anything like that. So you build that narrative, and then it's very easy, because any journalist who deviates from that narrative will be ostracized. And you can easily have a mob thing on them. I mean, they visibly have tried it with me, but they can't. But that's typical of these mob groups that cause monoculture. Now, I've noticed monoculture does not exist in any domain that has skin in the game, where there's survival from eating your own cooking, or survival from eating what you kill. So, for example, you don't have monoculture in the restaurant business because the restaurants are judged by their clients. Traders don't have a monoculture because they're judged by their P&L. You see, it's you survive. If you do the right thing, you survive. So traders have this huge variety of opinions among traders, but you don't have that one among academics, social science academia. You don't have that among in these fields that are prone to peer review. The only places in academia that are immune are the ones that have either very rigorous science or some contact with reality, such as engineering.
Nassim, when the Soviet system collapsed, I was pretty optimistic about that and was delighted about it, that the Cold War ended and the missiles were going to be reduced. And we did have better relationship with Russia. Things were better. We were trading and doing business, and I was very optimistic. But if you compare that to the last 2 or 3 years, or even in the last year or in the last week, it seems like there's an obsession with Russia. There's a Russiagate going on, and now we have this gassing of 2 people in London, and it just adds more fuel to the fire. How do you sort all that out? It just seems like it's so unnecessary and so extreme in that we've canceled out so much positive thing. And I see Gorbachev just wrote recently that we ought to calm down on some of this stuff. So how do you explain this, or what's your opinion about what's going on with Russiagate?
So I have a whole chapter here when I talk about the State Department people in America. I mean, just as a not targeting that particular group, but just the State Department people in general, the class of bureaucrats here in France and Brussels and the UK, who effectively cause more trouble. They don't understand complex system, and I explain how they don't understand that things are not linear in the real world, that actions have consequences. You remove someone, you may have adverse effects, and secondary effect will have their own secondary effects. So it's get very complicated. So there's things you shouldn't mess with. They don't quite understand that. And what they also don't understand is the mechanism of peace is not done by talking at the top. It's not the Congress of Vienna. 200 years later, the world is more complex. Peace is done at the bottom between people negotiating. So, and I took, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian problem, and I said that had the rest of the world had left the Palestinians and the Israelis to negotiate and work things out, they would have worked things out. The problem of all these people trying to help, all these NGOs, we don't know how they help. So the way you do peace is, and traditionally in that part of the world, the Levant and the Near East and the Middle East, all these three places, the peace has always been obtained via commerce in the souks.
Right.
This is why you had communities, you had Armenians, I grew up, you had Armenians, Christians, Maronite Christians, Greek Orthodox, Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, and they all coexisted. And Jews coexisted by doing business.
Wonderful.
So the way you get peace is via business, because there's something clean about money, all right? There's something clean about money because it's not zero sum. That's what people fail to understand.
I noticed that too, Nassim, when I walked through Yugoslavia during the Balkan Wars. We never knew who was a Serb or a Croat. We just did business together. So but you mentioned Syria, and we should talk a little bit about it. I noticed this morning, AFP, Agence France Presse, had reporting on the ground from Ghouta saying that thousands of people were streaming out of East Ghouta because a corridor had been placed by the Syrian army. But this seems to counter the media narrative that we've heard all along. Because if Assad is gassing his people at random, why on earth would people who are safe with the rebels in East Ghouta, why would they at first opportunity run toward Assad's troops?
Okay, first a disclaimer here. I'm Christian from Lebanon. Okay, the Greek Orthodox, we have a community in Syria. The Greek that went down by maybe 70% during the Syrian war, 50 to 70%. Okay, and they vanished. So we're extinct thanks to Obama's rebels. So here I'm giving you my that I may be biased for that worth. But let me tell you one thing. I observed Aleppo very closely. And I spoke to a lot of people in Aleppo, all right? Because I have a place in northern Lebanon. I have 6 Syrian refugees, and they have relatives, and you talk to people. So when the press here was describing the attack on the rebels in Aleppo as like genocide, all that stuff, the story from the other side was completely different. People were dying to go to the government area because they couldn't live under the rebels. Talk to someone who you would think would be neutral, an Armenian from Aleppo. They had a large community decimated now, more than decimated. Decimated is 10% more than decimated. But talk to those who either left or have families who have left and see the stories. So it looks like the media has been via PR. You take the Middle East Institute, these PR firms, in fact lobbyists, and they call themselves think tank. Either the story. Here I took one simple case, Aleppo, compared to what I heard from the media and what was going on, and then later on nobody went back and corrected. Okay, so you're entitled some skepticism about whatever you hear. Through these filters. And then the other thing I've noticed is either from the Civil War, the Lebanese Civil War, or Syrian Civil War, what do these people do with the media? They go gather in a restaurant in Beirut, okay? And they hang around talking to one another. And then they come back with a story that's completely at odds with what's going on. And it's because of monoculture is what they seek. It's not corrected by anyone, eventually, except by locals. And nobody listens to locals. So the story of Ghouta is definitely within this, because I talk to people in Syria, and I remember where I'm from, and so I talk to people there, and I have a completely different story. I mean, these rebels were shelling Damascus, and the people in there have been invited to come because basically, just like with Gaza story. With the Gaza story, you shell the Israelis from Gaza, and then you claim, hey, you use human shields. They've been trying to play the same game. But also what I find mysterious is how come nobody reports on human shield use in Mosul, but you have, or the effect of human shields. Mosul, how come Mosul was very clean, but Aleppo is not clean? So Ghouta is just another special case. But I find even more mysterious is these very, very, very foolish uses of chemical weapons. That why would a winning government use chemical weapons that bring you no military advantage? Or now with a story in the UK, this is very mysterious. Why would Putin? Why would someone be winning across everything he's doing? He seems to be winning, Putin. Why would he be compromising himself for a fourth-rate agent, okay, who's not even an agent anymore? Okay, think about it. There's something fishy that's going on.
Well, Nassim, you made a very good point earlier on that if the people there would be left to themselves, they would work these out as they have throughout history, and they learn to live together. And it's when the outsiders come in. I want to ask a question about where does all this motivation come? We've already talked about the media. You don't get the truth from the media. You can give us more truth about what's really going on because you understand the area much better. But do these groups just sort of float together? Is there something called the deep state that you recognize? Is it the oil, or is it neoconservatives, or is it a combination of it all?
It's a combination. It is a combination. But I've written a chapter here called the minority rule. The minority rule always thinks and ensembles are dominated by the behavior of a very small number of people. And just like you would say, the Pareto 80-20 is like 20% of the people determine, have 80% of the land, and 80% of the people have the remaining 20% of the land. The same thing. It's actually worse than the 80-20. So maybe 01-99. So the behavior of the journalists is definitely suspicious, but can be explained by monoculture, by these people living hand to mouth and not wanting to compromise their source of income. The behavior of lobbies is transparent. We know exactly who's paying them. So you know who's paying the lobbies in Washington. Saudi Arabia is a very big contributor. The UAE, another big contributor, and the Qataris are big contributors. So you know that what narrative you're going to get, and you don't have a counter narrative. You see. So what can we do? I don't know. I mean, sue the lobbies for causing. The legal system should be allowing us to sue lobbies for something, or find some mechanism to get protected. Or what would happen eventually, and this is one interesting thing about information, is that in an organic environment, and we're moving into an organic environment, you cannot mess with information. Look, we're talking about it. We're going to be on YouTube, and if YouTube decides to lost interest in your show, someone else will pick it up. There's something about information that you cannot really repress the truth for too long. It comes back usually it comes back with a vengeance. And what I've noticed over the past 10 years, there's something I call the Lindy effect here. Lindy is in the book. So Lindy is the Lindy effect is something, I call it Lindy, has the properties of Lindy if its life expectancy increases with time. So things that have we've been doing for a long time seem to fit our inner psychology is a lot better. So the mechanism of the news, you sit down and you have ABC News, or sit down, you have PBS or some giving you, or just the New York Times, was transitory in the history of humanity. Traditionally, historically, the way people got the news was by being conveyors of the news, recipient and conveyors of the news. Right. You go in ancient Athens, you go to the barber, you bring news, you take news, and the barber is a broker of news. And now we have the barber shop is Twitter, and then you bring news and take news, and then rapidly you get that media gets replaced with organic providers of news, and I was very surprised. In the UK, we put the book on embargo, my book, because it would upset journalists. In the UK, they managed to get copies. They gave me bad reviews. The book, boom, opened, and now it's the second seller in London for 4 weeks. So, and within there was made the bestseller list with negative reviews. In the US, we had 0 reviews. It was still a bestseller. So they harm you if they ignore it, and they can't harm you if they attack you. All right. So there's something about and Donald Trump. Who now I'm sure is doing some few things that are irritating the three of us. Donald Trump was elected in spite of the media against him. So that it seems to me that the media, because of monoculture, has lost the trust of the people, and maybe the structure of information. Just if you put information, let information flow, the truth will happen. You know, when a judge is corrupt, people tend to know about it in a community, small community.
Well, excuse me, we're getting pretty close, but Daniel has another question here, but and then I have another question too, so we want to move right along. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, just a short minute. I can't let you go without talking a little bit about the nominated Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. You know, I was reading Colonel Pat Lang is a very good commenter on these things, and he was talking about Pompeo's career. Yes, he went to West Point, as we're all reminded. As soon as he paid his service debt, he immediately resigned his commission and went on to law school. So Colonel Lang says he never saw combat, and more importantly, war is an abstraction to him. And I immediately thought of your book and Skin in the Game. So this great war hawk who talks about his past at West Point really doesn't have any skin in the game, does he?
No. This is why the idea of skin in the game is actually very practical. My book is what society should we be designing, and society closer to a federalism that we had in America, where the job of the federal government is to make sure nobody attacks the country, not to just try to do regime change elsewhere, or imagine enemies and keep creating enemies to keep the arms merchants in business. So the arms maker in business. So he's symptomatic of the system, and we thought that Trump was going to correct that. I also spoke about interventionistas in the book by saying they got to have a mental illness because everything they've done has failed. But because they're not punished, they're in an air conditioning office in Washington, because they're not punished by their mistakes. Well, of course, someone else is paying the price, so they keep doing the same thing. And I spoke about all these neocons. It's got to be a mental illness to think that they're going to get it right next time.
Yeah, maybe one day it'll come, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask you a question about monetary policy, which is something that fascinates me. And I'm sure you recall there was a day when I asked Bernanke whether gold was money, and that's been ruled out. It's no longer money, so we have to work on something else. And a lot of people are working on it, and they're into the cryptocurrencies. And I just wanted to get your opinion about this and where we stand, because I quite frankly don't think the monetary system we have today is very healthy, and that something will have to come about to change it. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that.
Okay, I mean, they basically, anytime you debase your currency, you price yourself out of business. And that's history. In every, states used to issue their own currencies, and you were not bound to use the currency of your state. Use the currency that you trusted. This is why, for example, in the story of the money changes in the New Testament, God only took the shekels of Tyre. So people had to change into that currency. So it seems to me that Bitcoin is a good start. It may not be the end, it may fail, but now we know how to do it, because it is the first time in history we have now a currency that has absolutely no owner. It's distributed. So in other words, you can't have someone controlling the monetary policy. It's a Hayekian like a dream to have something like that. Now Bitcoin may fail. It's not yet a currency in the sense that its transactions are not easy to do, but it's good because you can already see the effect of central banks worried about Bitcoin. Let's say Bitcoin becomes endorsed by a state, any state, random state, and look at what can happen next. You see, international transaction in Bitcoin. Can you imagine? It is simply because nobody can mess with it. and you cannot ban transaction. It is, and we're getting deeper and deeper. The store organic. Now, Bitcoin itself may fail, but the concept is I mean, the fact that Bitcoin is at 8,000 or whatever it is this morning, it should be telling us something. I mean, I heard the same people who said it should go to zero today were saying it should go to zero when it was at 50. Right, and of course, at 1,000 it should go to zero. At 1,500 it should go to zero. Now, this is telling us something, and it's already putting pressure on central banks. Just like similar, I live in a town near New York City where we had a very lousy taxi company, and but Uber, opened, and Uber became common. Now we have a good taxi company in the town. The mere existence of that challenge to traditional banking by Bitcoin is going to be good for everyone. Maybe not for Bitcoin, but definitely is a good start.
Right. Okay. We're going to wind this down now. But Nassim, I want to really thank you for being with us. This is a very special program for us. We're delighted that we had you on.
Great. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks a lot.
And I'm going to give the viewers a reminder here. I'm holding up this book. It's called Skin in the Game. And this is the theme that we've been talking a lot about today, and urge people to take a look at this. This is fantastic. It'll be another bestseller. It'll be top of the list. And I think it's fantastic that we've been able to get Nassim on our program today. I want to thank our viewers for tuning in today, and I'd invite him to come back to our program soon. Thank you.